Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it.
I mean, how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, great, Barry, a reefer.
Hi, welcome back. It's another episode of the Koala podcast. And today I'm talking to Corey Tobin of Symphony Grow. Something turned up on my inbox and I see Corey's in insurance, and I haven't had a conversation on the podcast about insurance for a good 18 months. So I just thought I would ask Corey, a little bit about his background and then where insurance is at the moment with cannabis. Corey, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on. Maybe just, I know we just went through it in the pre-record, but a quick bit of background about you and the company that you work for, Symphony Grow.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Sean. So Corey Tobin with Symphony Grow. I've been in the insurance industry for about 15 years now, insuring cannabis risks for the last 9 to 10 years or so, all over the United States and some in the UK just recently and other countries as well.
Oh, that's interesting. I might get onto that conversation with you after we've dealt with the US. Where are we from, say, 24 months ago, insurance coverage in the US? Discussing, let's talk federally first, and then a majority of it seems to be state-based to me. And then, I suppose what I'd like to dig down to actually on state-based is there's so many types of insurance. Who is finding it the easiest to get insurance and who's finding it the hardest to get insurance?
That's a great question. And I'll touch on the insurance in just a second, but I also was a licensed operator for over 6 years.
Okay, so you know
in
the
California. So I understand from the operator standpoint, but also from the insurance standpoint. And it is more of a state specific. You have carriers that will work just intrastate, but we are seeing it now expand nationally, which there are still few carriers. There's, let's say, a dozen carriers when it comes to workers' comp, general liability, cyber liability, and so on. So just who's getting coverage really depends on the broker's knowledge and specialty to obtain that coverage. And it is a very slim market. So I find it very helpful to understand the risk and be able to get the proper coverage and understand what your operators are doing is a key driver in today's market, to really know what your operators are doing and how they're operating.
So I'm very interested, whenever I discuss insurance with people, people like yourselves always mention first workers' comp and that sort of stuff. But it seems to me we're talking about a plant, we're talking about climate change. The most important people are the people who actually grow the stuff. And I know that through hearsay, so you can tell me much better, California, farms are having a really hard time of it, especially SME ones. So obviously big indoor grows, it's a different thing unless a huge earthquake hits you. But a lot of the outside growers, especially in Northern California, who have tried to move from what they like to call the legacy market to the legal market. I mean, they're right on the edge because climate change is really affecting not just the act on the particular crop, but I mean, wildfires throughout the California at the moment are just out of control. And I presume very quietly it's destroying a lot of crops that we just don't even hear about, and people are losing their livelihoods.
Yeah, there is a lot of folks that are losing crop and losing their product with fires. Absolutely. You mentioned workers' comp earlier. Yeah, that's an issue, but I think specifically in California, there has not been an issue to obtain it. More recently, there's been more carriers coming into the space. From a crop coverage, I know we talked about the fires. Crop coverage is few and far between. There's very few carriers that will offer true crop coverage.
That was a bit of a Dr. Seuss, wasn't it?
Yeah. So there's very few carriers that will do it, if any, and that all depends on.
Is that because the liabilities is such a nightmare compared to doing all the standard business stuff? in dealing with, employees and, medical, all that normal stuff. But I mean, the basis of this industry is growing a plant. So
Correct.
the fact that the insurance is thinnest on the sharpest end uh, must be a big problem for the industry, isn't it?
Yeah, it really comes down to it still being a Schedule One, so you don't have the large insurance carriers like a Travelers or a Chubb or a Hartford that are offering the coverage for operators on an admitted basis. Now, there's pros and cons to admitted versus non-admitted, but there is coverage. Back to what I said earlier, if you have an agent or a broker that understands the risk and knows your business, you can get that coverage in any state. And there are large carriers offering other coverages, like Berkshire Hathaway on workers' comp. That's top five carriers in the world that is offering workers' comp coverage. So there are carriers that are active in this space. It's just having the right agent or broker really facilitate it for yourself, for that operator.
And when companies are offering services across states, is it as simple as they just have an agent's office in that state and that agent's office works within that state's legislation, rules and regulations? How does that work? Because that's always seemed a bit murky to me.
Great question. So, as long as the agent is a license in that state or their firm is licensed in that state, you won't have an issue. It'll be a non-resident license if they don't live there. Now, the actual insurance carrier could be licensed in the state as well, but it doesn't have to have a physical office because in the policies, the language is still intrastate. You can't cross state lines as long as that operator is following those local laws, state laws to the best of their ability and not crossing state lines, they're okay because it is on a liability basis. If it was cargo or auto liability, it has to be intrastate in the state lines. All of it has to be in the state lines.
Okay, and I mean this is a bit of a more difficult one to answer. If you were a retail operator or any sort of operator, have have you seen over the last decade you've been working in the industry, states that do better with insurance coverage than other states?
Yeah, I have actually. And I actually find carriers on the East Coast or middle of the country are writing more business than on the West Coast. And
Where there's
because
more business to be written on the West Coast. Yep.
yeah, and you know what? It's really comes down to the local laws and the regulatory laws of what's happening with the operators and that directly impacts the operators, the insurance carriers, and so on. Like, for example, insurance carriers don't like to be in Oklahoma. They have no problem being in Maryland, no problem Massachusetts, New York's a state that's questionable right now because of how the regulatory and the license framework was rolled out. So that really impacts some of these insurance carriers as well.
So, I mean, look, you've said, like anything else in cannabis, there's a state of constant confusion that's like I don't know, like a lava lamp almost sometimes. Have you seen, you say you've been working in the insurance part of the industry and has been an operator, since 2015. Have you seen a steady incline upwards, providing better services for the industry with regard to insurance? Or is it literally flatlining and nothing will be seriously done until some proper legislation goes through DC?
It's absolutely getting better. Now, different lines of coverage are getting better. For example, you have more workers' comp carriers than you did 3, 4, 5 years ago, and they're offering more services, risk control services, loss control services alongside us as the broker on the accounts. So you are seeing more carriers come in that offer better services that are included with those premiums that are being paid. Now, you have some insurance carriers that step in with one foot and step out with the other. So we see some segments of the business getting better and some getting worse, depending on how claims have rolled out over the past 10 years or so.
And can you define what's getting better and what's getting worse?
Workers' comp's getting better. You're getting crime coverage that is getting better. Products liability language is getting much better. So for ancillary businesses and cannabis businesses. So another thing that most people are unaware of is if most of your revenue derives from cannabis, but you're ancillary where you're not a license holder, the insurance carriers still look at you like a license operator because all your revenue derives through there. So that is one thing that we see. Now, cyber liability is getting better. You have more POS system, point of sales that are flowing through. So we are seeing cyber liability better. General liability, which is your slip, trip, and fall, that's getting better. Rates are getting better there, rated per square foot versus based off of your sales like it was historically. Now, cargo's getting tougher. So if you're transporting cash, you're transporting your inventory, we are seeing that get more expensive because losses have occurred more frequently in the past. You have auto liability, which is not just cannabis in the cannabis space. It's in every industry, whether it's construction, manufacturing, distribution. We're seeing that rise, especially on the West Coast. But we are seeing hired and non-known auto liability. You have a lot of retail shops that hire employees that drive their own vehicles. You have to get hired and non-known auto liability. Minimum premium on that is $20,000. So you are seeing cost of auto that is increased, non-owned auto that is increasing, and also property coverages. You are seeing increase in property rates. Again, that's not directly to cannabis, that's every industry, but it is impacting the cannabis.
And we know that the cannabis industry has grown exponentially, especially in the last 3 years. Do we have any numbers on, it's a bit of a fuzzy thing to ask, but do we have any numbers defining sort of what percentages of the cannabis industry are, bothered to take out any insurance? And is it all towards the top end of the industry rather than the middle and the bottom end of the industry?
You know, that's a great question. I would say the industry now is moving towards, I would say 90+% being insured. And the reason for that is a lot of the retail shops require you to issue a certificate of insurance to the retail shop because their
But this
brands
is
are in
this is really interesting. 90% of them are saying that they're getting insured, but there's only a really small amount of people providing coverage. Therefore, wouldn't the rest of the insurance industry think, shit, that's a gold mine at the moment?
Yeah, I think what's going to happen is you have a lot of these insurance carriers that are sitting on the sidelines and they're waiting till it gets rescheduled or even descheduled. But once it does that, there's going to be a lot more insurance carriers I feel will come into the space. Now, that all depends on how the language is, how long it takes to get rolled out. But keep in mind, the insurance industry is always, say, 3 to 5 years behind most of the changes because it's all contracts and it takes time to revamp all those contracts. And I think it's a matter of time. As soon as it becomes rescheduled, you're going to have a lot more carriers come in and they're going to go knock on the doors of the agents and brokers and say, okay, we've been waiting now that it's legal. We want to come to the table with better programs, more capacity, more coverages.
I think this is really interesting because the banks will be doing the same thing at the same time, and
Exactly.
I think it will be a bit of a slaughterhouse for a lot of these companies who thought that they could wait till everything was really safe, and then everybody would welcome them with open arms. But you and I have been working in this industry for a decade now, and I deal with lawyers a lot and CPAs and those sorts of professional people. I would say people's attitudes would be fairly hardened to companies who didn't take any risk because the entire cannabis industry is based on some level of risk. And anybody who's worked in it, whether they're like you and me on the edge, or or others who are either retailing, growing, etc., then they're going to give pretty short shrift to a lot of these companies, aren't they?
Yeah, I believe so. And you and I know it's such a specialized industry. These carriers that think they're going to step in day one and make a big splash. It's highly unlikely. This is a relationship business. This is a very specialized business, and it's going to stay that way. I mean, the cannabis industry is such a tight knit, and I highly doubt they're going to make a huge splash. They'll come in, ruffle some feathers, but you and I know it's very
I
specialized
mean,
and
they'll
it's
just offer bargain basement, which I presume after the 12-month contract, prices will triple or quadruple. Won't that be the sort of approach they'll take?
And we've seen that in the past, yeah. So carriers will come in, offer a really cheap policy, and then realize it doesn't move so quick, and they may not specialize and offer all the extra bells and whistles and coverages that you need to be competitive versus the folks that have been in it for a decade. So then we do see some kind of step out and not play in this space. So we do see that here and there, and it just validates the conversation that these carriers aren't going to make as big of a splash as they think, and it is very much so a relationship business.
So the other thing you mentioned earlier is also doing some coverage overseas, and the insurance industry always has been, always will be global, and it's people talking to each other, creating packages, all this sort of stuff. What have you done internationally, and how have you done it? And is it any easier? I can't imagine it is than doing the work in the US.
It is easier. We'll work with our Canadian partner and we'll work with our UK partner and we'll write the business. It's easier to underwrite. It's different sets of laws. And we're able to get different carriers that operate in this space. And they're very good carriers. They're still very competitive. The carriers here in the US are very competitive on price as well. But the ones in the UK and Canada will offer better coverages for pretty much the same price. So when you're comparing apples to oranges, you need to make sure you're offering the best coverage and the best price. And you don't get to do that here in the US, but you can in other countries that offer good carriers.
So, using the UK as an example, what sort of work are you doing there? And can you say who you're working with?
I can't disclose the clients just due to NDA reasons, but ancillary businesses will go to the UK and they'll go to events. There was a big cannabis convention within the last 4 months, and we had half a dozen clients there, and we wrote all their insurances here from the US, but with our UK
UK
offices that we
partner, yeah.
partner with. Yeah, and they were great carriers. You got Beasley and Chubb, some of the largest carriers in the world that are stepping into the space more on an ancillary basis, but um, they're comfortable with it
Well,
because the
these
cost.
guys dealt with these sorts of products 400 years ago, when they were thought of in the same way. So
Mhm.
I would imagine it makes perfect sense to them because that's, that's how these businesses started on commodities.
Correct. And they step in with special event coverages. We're going to see some consumption lounges. We're going to see different programs for consumption, which carriers are rolling that out now. So we will see more carriers dabble in the space where they specialize, step into the cannabis, which will be helpful.
And what about Canada? Is Canada sort of fairly flat market now? It's quite mature, or is it is, is it growing at a gentle pace?
I believe it's still flat, and what we're seeing is a contraction. So we're seeing the folks that are really they have their business together, they have things dialed in. We see them staying relationship wise, we see them all working and staying strong financially. But as operators, they have that local community. And we're seeing that on the West Coast too. I mean, we're seeing some of the biggest operators step into the West Coast, couldn't cut it in California, and they decided to move on out. And you have the local brands that are doing very well in California. It's a whole different animal in California, but so
Well,
we
I presume that up in Oregon and Washington State, it's the same sort of thing.
it's the
It's
exact same.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've lived in Oregon for a while. It's a fairly close-knit place business-wise, anybody, and they do like to deal locally on anything. So I would imagine something like this. Anybody coming from California, that's bad enough. They're coming from the East Coast, they'll just be sent packing home straight away. Get out of
Yeah.
my state.
Yep. You're absolutely right. And it's a good thing. You got the local businesses supporting local, and I think it's good. I think it's good. We will see some more contraction take place, I think, over the next 12 months, but we will also see
It's funny
businesses.
you say this because insurance, which I always see as a big global thing and a behemoth. Within the cannabis industry, it's actually probably one of the sectors that's really local to local compared to a lot of the other business that happens in cannabis in terms of people providing services. So it's quite an interesting dichotomy, actually.
It is. It really is.
Looking forward, you sort of alluded to it earlier. Schedule 3, you do think that'll make a difference?
I think, yes, I think so. It'll help the operators with banking standpoint. From an insurance standpoint, we'll get a few more carriers that will step in, I believe. We're already seeing some get more interested. That will just help bring better coverages to the space, and it will give more funding into the space, which I think is great for operators at a cheaper price. And I think that's a big deal. We're seeing that across the country with debt that's coming due, and that will really help operators, I believe, is getting that descheduled.
And yeah, we spoke quickly about the UK as an example, but the international market, is that perceived as a growth market, with you sitting in the US? Are you looking at Germany? Are you looking at what's happening in Africa? Are you seeing what's happened in Thailand? Because I presume US partners will be going in there. Australia, okay, Israel is a bit of a, you don't really know what's happening there at the moment, but they've got a fairly mature medical cannabis market that they want to grow. I mean, all these disparate places, are they sort of coming in? Do you feel them coming into the fold?
I do. I do. And I was just at MJ Biz last week in Las Vegas, and you have folks from all over the world that are coming in, and we're seeing the market mature, which I think is great. We are going to see Germany, UK, and other countries that are doing very well. And they're all working together and communicating wise. So it's just a matter of time till we start seeing more and more of it.
Last year, it felt a bit, from conversations with people, MJ Biz felt a bit flat. Prior to MJ Biz, there seemed to be quite a lot of, a bit more excitement in the air, but I haven't really got the sense back whether there was more business being done this year than last.
I think so. There definitely felt like there wasn't as many attendees as a few years prior to COVID.
No,
Yes,
I think the gold rushes, and so we're getting, but
correct.
last year I felt as though not much business got done, but it felt as though people going this year, they're not getting overexcited, but they are doing business.
Correct. There's a lot more relationships that have solidified over the years, and we're seeing those relationships pan out. People that are staying in the space, working together, collaborating. We're seeing more and more of that. And you're not getting, I guess, dumb money I don't know, I'm not sure if that's the right term, but early on,
It is. Yeah, I think
so
that's
much,
spot on term, actually.
yeah, there was so much dumb money that was coming out. You're not getting that anymore. You're getting true business and folks that are coming in and they're having different conversations than they were early on. So I believe it was a very good MJ Biz this year, and there was a lot of attendees. I'd say 30,000 or so. There was quite a bit.
And was there, in terms of demographics, again, sorry to take you off insurance, but in terms of demographics, what's beginning to interest me in the area that I work in is now, I'm getting a lot more younger lawyers who actually studied cannabis at law school. They're going in, they're creating their own firms, or they're creating a practice within a SME firm. And that demographic change of not even under 40s, but under 30s is bringing a new dynamic to the industry, which I don't think has yet like shown itself, but I can just feel it coming. Did you get a sense of that at MJ Biz? I'm hoping this is the case, because the sooner old people like me are out of the game, and well, it's not our industry. It's for people under the age of 30. It's their industry to create. We've created all these frameworks and regulations, and it's all been done by old people basically. And I sense that young
There was
people.
definitely Yeah, there was definitely younger folks there, but then you also have the older folks that have been in the business for quite some time. So you've had a mix, which I think is great. And you have small law firms, people just starting up, and you got big law firms where people are educating as well, on employment law, contract law, you name it. So that was really
Well,
cool.
yeah, that's right. It's spread out into it's
Correct.
now just another industry that
Mhm.
law and accountancy and all the other services have to deal with, as though it's not, people aren't concentrating on the plant.
Mhm.
It's the industry that needs all these particular professional services.
Correct. And that's the key thing, is working with those professional services to really help those businesses, whether it's insurance, CPAs, lawyers, your consultants, folks that have been in that space that can protect you as the operator is a key thing. And all these new states coming on board, Ohio, New Jersey, and New York, and so on, is so you had a lot of those folks coming as well.
And did you
Um,
sense there was more people talking about education? Because that seems to be, for me, one of the missing things is not so much education, but formalized education. That not some awful online course that somebody invented when they woke up at 2 in the morning, thought that was a good idea, I can make some
yeah.
money. I've been dealing with this in law, and I'm sure you've been dealing with this in insurance. It's not that the people who use these services are stupid. It's just that there's a whole lot of extra complications, and really, and a lot of people in professional services don't want too much education because that takes away a little bit of their revenue from them. So, were you finding that there's more discussion about how do we do education properly in this industry at MJ Biz?
Yes, there's a lot more conversation around education that is taking place in every vertical and segment of the business. So that's a good thing. It needs to continue, and I believe it is going to continue. You're seeing it in a lot more college courses and education courses across the country, which I think is very, very positive.
Before we finish up, because we've only got a few minutes left to run, um, give us an overview of how you would like to see the support of the cannabis industry by your industry and other professional services by, say, this time next year or even following. I mean, we've got a new administration. They are up and down. You have no idea what they're going to do. Do you think process can defeat politics?
I think the people have spoken, and I think the people have spoken on cannabis specifically, where it's here. It's 40 plus states, whether medical and rec. It's a matter of time. They need to do what's right and legalize it and get all the folks that are serving time out, number one. And then um, they need to, from an insurance standpoint, they need to offer these robust coverages just like any other industry. If you, as you mentioned earlier, cultivation, you cultivate trees and other things in other industries. We need to be able to provide the same coverages that other industries are getting at a reasonable cost. And I think, and the same services. And that's where I would like to see it within the next 12 months is specific programs